Everybody, just hold up. It is Sunny Mehta Day here in New Jersey in the Garden State on the day that the New Jersey Devils announced that Sunny Mehta, the Jersey guy from Wyckoff, New Jersey, who played high school hockey at Ramapo, went on to be an accomplished poker player, worked in finance, started the Devils analytics office in 2014, went on to win 2 cups with the Florida Panthers, is now home. He is back. Reminds me of the Carmelo Anthony days when he came back to the Knicks and they played that song by that rapper who, did a lot of other random weird stuff and is now in jail. I'm coming home. I'm coming home. But Sunny Mehta is back with the New Jersey Devils, back in the Devils organization. Out of a little hiatus, maybe got some experience and learned a whole hell of a lot in Florida, winning 2 cups. Sunny Mehta, the Devils' new general manager. And as always, welcome to the Jersey Devils Brocast. I'm Jay Bake. Listen to us every Tuesday night live, 9 to 10 o'clock on Radio Garden State. You can listen on RadioGardenState.com, the Audacy app, Tunein, Radio.net. If there's another way to listen, go for it. Find it. Radio Garden State also has a pretty cool Patreon to listen to recorded episodes of all of your favorite shows, including us. But back to the Devils. And yes, playoff hockey is on right now. I'm watching the Bruins-Sabres game. The Devils aren't involved, so unfortunately we have to talk about things like this, like new general managers and the future of the team. But it's also an exciting time because it's a whole new, group of possibilities and changes and things that in the long run, maybe the silver lining of this season will be the change the Devils needed happened because of how poorly they played. And better days are ahead. But momentous day for the Devils. I'd say this is the first big change in the organization since the Devils hired Ray Shero. And before that would have been really when Lamoriello got hired in the summer of 87. Shero came in 2015. Then Lamoriello left for Toronto shortly thereafter. And then in the 1920 season, Fitzgerald took over. But the difference there is this. Fitzgerald was a Ray Shero guy. Fitzgerald worked with Shero in Pittsburgh, came up and learned the ropes from Shero. They had a lot of similar philosophies on how you play the game, on how you build a team. I would assume similar philosophies on building a culture with a team. And this is the first full-scale change the Devils have seen since Shero then. Because this is not a Shero go. The Mehta worked in the Devils organizations and in the Devils organization, their analytics department. This is kind of more of an outside guy. He hasn't been here for years now. He went to Florida, learned a completely different way of doing things. And under Bill Zito, as assistant GM, made 3 cup finals, won 2 of those Stanley Cups. And all signs point to him playing a significant role in that front office and a lot of the decision-making, the players that were brought in, the philosophy, and again, how do you make a championship team? And there's different ways to do that. Look at the teams in the playoffs right now. Comparing Montreal to Carolina. Even this Buffalo Bruins game, these teams have a lot of differences. Go out west and compare Colorado with Minnesota. There isn't one way to do it. There's multiple ways. You can win with a heavy team. You can win with speed. You can win with tenacity and aggressiveness. Go back to the 90s. The difference between the 94 Rangers and the 95 Devils. 2 completely different styles. Rangers in 94 were, safe was death, and we were all offense, and that's about it. Go to the Devils win in 95, polar opposites. All about defense, and all we need to do is score 2 or 3 goals to win. So this is the first time in a long time the Devils are going to see a full-scale philosophical change in the organization, which was needed. I think things got stale. You need new voices. You need new people. You need a total fresh look at this team. And I think we saw that pretty much. I think we all knew that by the end of the fall, that things needed a serious, serious change. And we just got that. And, we'll see what happens next. But much like Ray Shero, there was a pretty big turnover. Different time. The Devils were pretty much in full-blown rebuild mode. Where now this team is more in how do we get over the hump. And he talked about that today and his belief in a lot of the core guys and their ability to do that. And we'll see. Maybe not. But some good quotes from today that I thought were important. All of which I'll go Sunny Mehta quotes first, and then David Blitzer had a few at the end here. But as many of you know, I've been one of you for 40 years. And it's really not an exaggeration when I tell you this is my dream job. I grew up 20 miles from here. I played high school hockey in New Jersey. I've been following this team since I was a small kid. And it's funny because I was born in Michigan, but I moved here at 4 years old in 1982. And you know who else moved here in 1982? The Devils. And one of the reasons I really like that quote from Mehta today was that I think we're seeing, for the first time maybe in my time as a Devils fan, now I'm almost 37 years old, been following this team since I was 5. But as a kid, that was like the first generation of Devils fans. We've now seen multiple generations of fans grow up with this team, grow up with the memories of the Devils and what it means to be a Devil and represent New Jersey. I think you're starting to see now guys want to come and play and or manage and be in administrative roles here in New Jersey, which is pretty cool. We've seen that with Ranger guys. So guys from the tri-state area grew up Rangers fans or Islander fans. We've seen it with the Mets and Yankees all the time. Great players or, GMs that come back and, they grew up a Mets fan, like Stearns in New York, who's currently ruining the franchise. But regardless, they're Jersey guys. It says a lot about where Jersey hockey is. It's a state to be taken seriously. The prized general manager candidate, basically the top free agent of all front office personnel, wanted to come to New Jersey, not just because of, we're close to the city. We have some really nice neighborhoods. But because he grew up here, he's a Jersey guy. And then he settled the greatest debate of all, and it is Taylor ham, folks. It's not pork roll, Taylor ham. But I think that's really cool. There's a link here to past history of the Devils. There's a guy that understands the state, the fan base, what we expect. Said he was at Game 7 in 2003, and Marty was robbed of the Conn Smythe. I thought that was cool because we all kind of feel the same way. And that's, in recent memory, we've seen that a few times now, but there's this link to the Devils and growing up in Jersey and playing hockey here and how competitive hockey is getting in New Jersey and how we are producing some really good NHL players across the board. And I think that means a lot to the state to have a guy like this not only come in and take the job, but he was the number one guy for all of these open positions in the offseason. Which then leads to the next quote. He said, I've definitely thought about winning the cup with the Devils. The first year winning it in Florida, I took it back to my high school, Ramapo High School in Franklin Lakes. And I think as happy as everybody was, I definitely got a lot of chirps that, you're bringing this here with Florida. Why don't you bring it here with Jersey? And so I've kept that in the back of my mind. And again, it's the dedication of coming back, and I want to win for the Devils. I want to win for New Jersey because I'm from here. I'm a Jersey guy. That resonates with the fans. I think that's important. I'm extremely optimistic about this team. We have a lot of talented players, and I really, truly believe that these talented players are about to hit an inflection point and get over that hurdle. It's my job to make sure that this roster is consistently flush with the necessary amount of talent to be a championship team, and I intend to do that. Yeah, I said in last week's episode, kind of doing a little bit of a post-mortem on the Devils. The one knock on Fitzgerald, or the one thing I don't think you can knock him on, was I don't think he put together rosters that were necessarily bad, especially from 2023 and on when they went to win now mode. Almost every hockey pundit had the Devils in the playoffs in 24 and in last year and this year. Many picked them to make bigger steps and win the division or compete for the division or finish second or third in the division without much issue. Not be a wild card team that sneaks in, but be a team that they're in the playoffs. There's no doubt about it. You don't do that by building bad rosters. You don't do that by having players that aren't good. And it might feel that way fans, sometimes we operate in a vacuum. Turn on the NHL Network in February. You're going to see a lot of fan bases that are really unhappy. And in a lot of cases, I do say, well, at least we're not the Maple Leafs. At least we're not the Rangers. Frankly, I think the Devils are set up better in the long run than even the Islanders. I mean, at least we're not. There's a lot of teams the Devils are well ahead of and better off than. And when you already have Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and Jesper Bratt, who I consider kind of the untouchable core, the three guys that are like, they are really the guys. Most teams in the league would die to start with that. That is a hell of a group to start with. 2 number 1 centermen and a number 1 winger. That's a great way to start. And not a lot of organizations have that. Now, in saying that, there's a lot of teams in the playoffs right now that don't have the talent the Devils have, and they're in the playoffs and the Devils aren't. So there are a lot of missing things. I think maybe it's a culture issue with Fitzgerald, but I don't think it was acquiring talent. I even wonder, too, with the draft record, was it really he drafted bad players, or they just didn't do a good job at getting the most out of what these guys had? That maybe these guys weren't going to be top-line players, but you can turn them into a really good third liner that can give you 20 goals. Turn him into a really good mid-pairing defenseman that's like, yeah, maybe he's not going to be a superstar, but man, this guy is just a great all-around player. They've had a hard time doing that. But I don't think it's a talent issue. And made it in some way kind of acknowledges that. We have a lot of talented players. But there are a lot of holes in the roster. There are a lot of issues. You don't miss the playoffs just because of culture. There are a lot of players that underperform, which we'll get to later. But there's that acknowledgement. Yeah, Devils do have some talent. There's a lot to work with here. And he said, I've had more detailed conversations, for example, with Nico and Jack and a few other guys. And I mean, I'm just nothing but excited. All they've exuded to me is passion. They're all, frankly, pretty ticked off that they're not in the playoffs, which I love. And there's nothing that I can sort of think of in that regard to believe that we can't get over this hurdle. There's not a doubt in my mind. And I think seeing Nico at the press conference during the clean-out day, kind of saying if you're not buying in early in the season, basically get out of here. In so many words, paraphrasing here. I mean, it's good to see the guys are pissed off that they didn't make the playoffs. It's great. But we kind of heard last year they were pissed off they didn't get through Carolina. We heard the year before they were pissed off that they didn't get back to the playoffs after a nice little run in 23. And I just saw the most bizarre goal in my life from center ice. Boston dumped it in, and it went past Luka Luukkonen for Buffalo. That was bizarre. Check that highlight out when you get a chance. But, the Devils, I've kind of had enough of the whole, we're upset, we're pissed off. That's all well and good, but what are you going to do about it? Florida was pissed off when they lost to Vegas in the Stanley Cup Finals. You know what they did? They went back and won 2 cups in a row. Toronto has said they're pissed off about not getting deeper in the playoffs for years, and guess what? They never got deeper in the playoffs. Get pissed off all you want. But if you're not making those changes, if you're not adapting, if you're not learning how to overcome adversity, if you're not learning how to deal with pressure, how to seal the deal, it doesn't really matter how pissed off you are at the end of April. And I'm kind of, I thought the Devils all said the right things in that, the clean-out day. But again, it's like, yeah, but we've heard that before. And that's great to hear that you guys are all ticked off and pissed off and you really want to take that next step forward. But what are you going to do to take that next step forward? You can say it in a press conference, but what are you going to do? You hear the stories, and when the Devils lost in 94 to the Rangers, like how those guys were practicing together. They were getting ready to go. There was no, woe is me, we're pissed off. There was we're coming back next year and we're winning. Enough of this. Scott Stevens and how he played in the 2000 playoffs after first-round exits as top seeds to the bottom seeds and losing to the Rangers and missing the playoffs. And it was enough's enough and was a man on a mission. I think we need to see a little bit of that from Nico, maybe from Bratt. I think we've seen that already from Jack this second half after the Olympic break. But you need that from some of the other guys and the other leaders on this team. I hope maybe this season is finally the one that pushes that forward where these guys say enough is enough and we are changing how we go about things. We're changing how we do things. We're going to change the everyday. Really identify, take that step back and go, what went wrong here? How come every time we lose Jack Hughes, we just can't win a game when we still have a relatively decent team outside of him? And what needs to change and what types of attitudes need to change? Maybe there's some guys with attitude problems that need to go. Who knows? Those are things I don't know at all. But, it was good to hear that. It was good to see that. It seems like Mehta had a lot of great things to say about that core group, and I'm interested to see what he's going to do here moving forward and what his real philosophy as the main guy and the head GM is going to be. I'd also, at this point, be kind of surprised if they bring in a president of hockey ops, because it sounds like he's running a hockey show, period, and it'll be more or less the Fitzgerald role. I think Marty is going to handle a lot of the communication, ownership, and translating the message in a way that works, and that guy that exudes the respect because he's the GOAT, which Shanahan kind of would have done as president of hockey ops. Maybe they feel they don't really need a guy like that. They already have that in Marty. What they really need is a different look and a different way of running this team and building this team and doing things. So, and I think they certainly did that with Mehta. Now, the other interesting part of today was that Sheldon Keefe was at the conference. And Mehta seemed to speak highly of him. But this is my feeling with Sheldon Keefe. And I'm saying this as many of you who listen to the show know, I'm a really just totally checked out Mets fan. Where at this point, I'm almost rooting for them to lose. And I think a big mistake they made in the offseason last year was, you can tell me all day long how it was not Carlos Mendoza's fault for their collapse in the second half last year. You know what? And you're probably right. It probably wasn't. But I just don't see a scenario where you just suck that bad, where you go from first to missing the playoffs and you bring the manager back. Even if it wasn't his fault, he was at the helm. You want full-scale change? You want to turn the page from last year, really move on. That's in the past. This is a new era. This is something different. In the Devils' case, first place in the East for a while from October to November. Team that looked like, finally, here they are. Devils are going to be making a run this year. And you go from that to missing the playoffs by a lot. At least the Mets, it was the last game of the season. The Devils were out of it with 4 or 5 to go. And for all intents and purposes, they were out of it by the end of February with no shot of coming back. Whether it's Keefe's fault or not, and Sheldon Keefe is a well-respected coach in this league. He will get a job very quickly, I am sure. I don't even know if this is Keefe's fault. I don't know the inner workings and the conversations that happened between Fitzgerald and Keefe in December. It seemed like the Devils made some adjustments that really didn't work, where they tried to play a style that just didn't suit them. Maybe because Jack was out, and now we're going to try and tighten this up a little bit, but didn't work. It failed in dramatic fashion. But either way, I think if you want to really turn the page and have a totally new vibe going into next season, have these guys come in with a whole new, fresh start, I just don't know how you bring Keefe back. I just don't see how that's going to work. And not only that, it's a whole new front office. This is going to be an entirely new staff, I would imagine, from top to bottom. We already started at the top. It's now going to start making its way down. I just don't know how then you keep the coach around. I know the Jets have done that before. I think it was Rex Ryan they kept around after they changed the front office, and it was a disaster. I mean, the Mets have kind of done that, like, when they kept Rojas around, when they brought in a whole new crew in 21, and that was a disaster. I think Stearns had every right. I love Buck Showalter, but Stearns had a right to come in and pick his guy. And I think Mehta has a right to come in and pick his guy too, who's going to fit really the philosophy and the culture of what we're trying to build. And I think even if Keefe checks off most of those boxes, I just think maybe you need a new voice. Maybe you need that voice and that guy that's going to come in that has a lot of winning experience. Which I think as fans, we always feel more comfortable with a guy that's won before. But I will remind fans of this when we talk about head coaches. Jacques Lemaire was fired from Montreal. Didn't make it 2 seasons. Never won a cup as a coach. Larry Robinson's stint in L.A. was so bad at one point, the Kings traded Wayne Gretzky. Pat Burns thought he was never going to get a job in this league again. Came close with Toronto and making the conference finals. Almost won with Montreal, making the finals. Really underachieved in Boston. Came to New Jersey, although all 3 of those guys won cups. Pete DeBoer never made the playoffs with the Panthers, and the Devils was the first of a few cup appearances that he's had in his career. And all these years later, DeBoer was the Sunny Mehta of coaches, the number 1 guy in the offseason, and the Islanders pounced on him before the season ended. So just keep that in mind. I know it's comforting to see a Laviolette who's won before, or Bruce Cassidy who's won before, but it has to be a guy that's going to really fit the tone you want to set with this team, the culture that you want to set with this team, and frankly, how you want this team to play. If you're going to build a team that's around speed and aggressiveness and forechecking and really using the strengths of your top players, a defensive first coach might not really be what you want, which that's kind of what Bruce Cassidy is. And if that's the type of style you're looking for, the Devils are going to need a whole lot of whole changes beyond just a few guys on the periphery and your third line. They're going to need a major facelift. This team is speed. This team is rush scoring. This team should be one of the top offensive teams in the league. You have to really go and exploit that and do that. Doesn't mean you don't play defense, but I am a Devils fan. I grew up loving the trap, but this team is not the yesteryear Devils. This is not the Devils from 95. This isn't even... Devils in 2001 scored a ton of goals. And frankly, the Devils with Parise and Kovalchuk were a pretty good offensive team too. But it's a totally different style than this team is now. We're going to get into a few things with that later as I still kind of wrap up the press conference. But that's going to be interesting to see. Does Keefe stay? Or does he go? I sat in on 2 of his press conferences. I think Sheldon Keefe is an incredibly intelligent hockey guy. I'm sure he's a great coach. I am sure that he will get a job very quickly if he wants one. He'll be getting a job very quickly. But I think this team needs a full-scale change. I just don't know how you can bring the guy back. Look at the Mets and just see the mess of that right now. You cannot bring back the manager. You can't bring back the head coach after a disastrous season. You just can't do it. The only way you do that is if you're rebuilding. If you kind of knew, we're going to be terrible this year. This guy, John Hines' his first year or two, Lindy Ruff's first year or two, when you knew we're building for year 3 or 4. If we suck in years 1 and 2, it's okay. We kind of are aware of that. We need our guys to grow and get better as a group, and it's going to take time, and we need to have some patience. When you're in win now mode, it's different. And I think you got to move on. And then my second part of that message, to reiterate it, just because the coach hasn't won a Stanley Cup doesn't mean he's going to be a bad coach. There aren't many coaches out there who have won Stanley Cups. And sometimes the guys that have been around the block for a while are part of the old guard, and maybe you need a little bit more of the new guard. And need to give some of these guys a chance too. And then one last quote from today's conference that I thought, just so everybody's aware too, because I know I've seen a lot of naysayers on the Devils ownership group about they don't care about winning, they don't care about this, they don't care about that. I think how you judge how much an ownership group cares about the team based off of how much are they willing to spend. You wonder about these small market teams in baseball that don't spend a dime. Do they really want to win? Now, just throwing money around in a really stupid fashion doesn't work either. Again, look at the Mets. But when an owner is willing to spend up to the cap and is essentially saying that now that they always will be, I think that's a good thing. Again, we live in a vacuum as fans. It's always these guys suck, our guys suck the most. This guy, I think the Devils ownership group is just fine. I don't think that's the issue at all. If anything, it seems like they're fairly hands-off and lets the front office do its job. I don't think they ever told Tom Fitzgerald, you must do this, you must do that. I think it seems more so that they're hands-off, maybe too much so. When we needed a change, they didn't get one, but you can't have it both ways. And I think this ownership group with the financial power, the commitment to spending on players and going up to the cap, I think that's great. And I think that's good news. And frankly, I don't know if Sunny Mehta would have taken this job if he didn't think that was going to be the case and knew, and from his experience of being here, that this ownership group really does have that commitment to winning. But the Devils got their guy. They got their guy. Blitzer and Harris got their guy. And I think one last point on Mehta before I move on to a bit of a Devils season recap for the second half of the show here. But in saying that the Devils, they did get the guy they wanted. He was the number one guy this offseason. I think there's a lot of parallels with him and David Stearns over in New York. Now, Stearns ran the Brewers, had some success, but he's an analytics guy like Mehta, new age guy like Mehta. Hometown guy, grew up a fan of the team, and there's no excuse. It's not like Stearns went elsewhere and Steve Cohen had to grab the second, third, fourth guy on his list, and you can always kind of say, yeah, but this wasn't the guy he wanted. He wanted that guy, and they couldn't get him. They got the guy they wanted, which means there is no excuse. Which means I would assume if the Devils aren't very good next year, the general reaction, you can see what that's going to look like right now by the Mets fan reaction right now of just being completely enraged and checked out. Because there is no excuse. You don't have anything to fall back on. Say, yeah, well, no. He has the keys to do everything and anything necessary to win. So there's a little bit of pressure there. I think he can handle it. I think the Devils are in a really good spot, and the Devils are in a better spot today than they were last week. I think overall, as I've said before, I give Fitzgerald a B-. I thought he took over a tough situation. Devils got back to the playoffs in one of the best regular seasons. I think he just didn't make the moves necessary, or the moves he made didn't work out in a way as intended, and they just couldn't get over the hump, and they couldn't become a consistent playoff team that was a real threat for the Cup. And that's the next step for this team, and Fitzgerald just couldn't push them over that line, and hopefully the Devils cross that line very, very soon. But right now, it is 9:30 p.m. You're listening to Radio Garden State. As always, I'm Jay Bake here on the Jersey Devils Brocast. We are going to 10 o'clock tonight. You can listen to Radio Garden State in a few different ways. RadioGardenState.com, Radio.net, the Audacy app, Tunein app. And then Radio Garden State is a pretty sweet Patreon. Now you can listen to past episodes, check out their website. A lot of cool gear. Really love the Radio Garden State hats. A lot of cool t-shirts. Go support the cause. Local radio. But you know what? I'm going to run the risk tonight. I'm skipping all the music. We are just going to keep on going here as we start with the New Jersey Devils season recap here. So let's go. Devils are 7th in the Metro. 27th in goals for. 226 goals for. Now, 15, 20 years ago, if the Devils scored 226 goals, that would have been enough because they only would have given up around 190, 180, 200. It would have been okay. They would have won a lot of games, 3-2, 2-1. It all would have been just fine. But the Devils are 18th in goals against at 253. 13th on the power play, 13.95%. Definitely worse from last year. That was a strength last year for the Devils. We were highlighting that going into the Carolina series in the first round about how Carolina, with their penalty kill, and should neutralize the Devils' power play, which was predominantly how they scored and how they couldn't score 5-on-5. Well, the Devils this year couldn't score, period. Couldn't score 5-on-5. And the power play was slightly above average at 13th. Wasn't great, wasn't terrible, slightly above average. If they're able to score more 5-on-5 and contribute more consistent offense, 13th overall power play doesn't look so bad. But when you can't score 5-on-5 at all, you need your power play to be elite, and the Devils just couldn't get that done this year. 17th are penalty kill, 79.33%. That's another one. The Devils' special teams last year were pretty strong. This year, not the case. 17th penalty kill, that's not going to get it done. Devils were 5th with shots for and 13th for shots against, which those are decent numbers. Devils were slightly above average with shots against, and they were great with shots for. They couldn't convert. And I think you also have to wonder, were they just a lot of shots that weren't really threatening plays? They weren't really good. I don't have all the high danger chances in front of me. That's I should be doing that, and I'll do that next week. But it just doesn't seem like they had a lot of that. They weren't creating those legitimate chances where, well, it was just bad luck all year. It's like, well, was it, or was it just the shots on net weren't quality chances? You're throwing a puck on net. And the other thing, I thought a lot of rebounds the Devils just couldn't convert on. Devils weren't converting on loose pucks around the net. Devils weren't able to score those goals, those dirty goals, those pigeon goals, as Reese loves to call it. They just weren't able to do that. It was either scoring on the rush or nothing at all, which is not how you win. You can still have that strength and score on the rush. There are several teams in the playoffs right now. That is their strength, is scoring on the rush. And they will be successful in doing so. But you also have to be able to score in other ways. I think that's why the Devils cannot beat Carolina. Carolina doesn't let them get that rush offense going. And the Devils just don't have the tools to really make those adjustments and change. And we're still going to try and score on the rush. That's our strength. But if we can't, and we can establish a lot of offensive zone time, get some rebounds, get some guys in front of the net, and score in some different ways that we otherwise wouldn't normally be doing, the Devils just haven't been good at that. And I think they have some guys that actually kind of should be good at that. Connor Brown, Timo Meier, Dawson Mercer, gritty guys that even, now in Brown and Meyer's case have a little bit of size on them. Mercer maybe not so much. But they couldn't get those garbage goals and do that. I remember back in the day, Dave Andrechuk couldn't move that guy in the late 90s. He just park right in front of the net, get those rebound goals, and that was that. Bobby Holik was good for that too once in a while. Get those big boys in front of the net, get those screens, get those rebounds. Brian Giunta, 5'7", not a big guy at all, but rebounds, tenacious, just incredibly tough in front of the goalie, incredibly competitive. And you know what? They were able to make it work. This team just wasn't able to do that. And now the other issue this year, goaltending, which many people have pointed out as the kind of, downfall of Tom Fitzgerald here, was the Markstrom extension that seemed a little premature, because right now he would not be extended and the Devils would have an open goalie slot and an opportunity to make a big change, and they're kind of stuck with Markstrom right now, it seems. But they were 22nd in the league in save percentage at 88.7%, which also, I can't believe that was only 22nd. That just goes to show you, too, goaltending throughout the league is tough. I think it was SHL Chips on Instagram, pretty cool account, to a lot of Devils stuff, and mentioned, how do the Devils address the goal score or the goaltending issue? And my response was, I don't know if you really can. I don't know if there's a viable goalie out there that's available that's really going to do it. The free agent market for goaltending is absolutely atrocious. They're all worse options than what you have now, which means everyone who needs a goalie is going to be trying to trade for one. So I'd imagine any halfway decent goalie that's available via trade, it's going to be a fairly steep price. I just think the Devils are stuck here with Allen and Markstrom. And maybe that's an area that Sunny Mehta is going to have to look at as they build this team and go, all right, we don't have the goaltending that we can really lean on here. How do we now, in our defensive structure, deal with that to limit high danger chances while also not limiting the offensive strengths of our team? Which is going to be a challenge if that's the case. Because like I said, this team is not built to be defense first, where if you have a goalie that's not very good, well, we can cover up for it by they're not going to be seeing a lot of shots in action. They're not going to get a lot of high danger chances against. we're find a way to squeak this out. Like, the Devils aren't maybe built for that. So to have subpar goaltending isn't great. It's not ideal for any team, but especially a team like the Devils. But that's going to be a big one. They only had 2 shutouts last year. Jake Allen, to his credit, had a decent season and over 900 save percentage. The issue is Markstrom. And Brodeur was on the One-Time All-Stars podcast, which is awesome, by the way, with Brian Boyle and Corey Schneider. This league is about 2 goalies. It's goalie tandems now. There aren't guys that play 70-plus games. There's very few of them. It's all about, do you have 2 guys? In some cases, 3. You need Markstrom to step up. He had an 88.3% save percentage last year. 1 shutout, 3.07 goals against. Where Jake Allen had a 903 save percentage and 2.74 goals against, 1 shutout. I know Markey got the majority of the starts. He had 7 more at 44. Allen with 37. Nico Dawes, though, is he an answer? If Markstrom is open to moving and you find something that works, is it time to give Nico Dawes that chance and hold your breath and hope for the best? Maybe. Maybe it is. But I think the options the Devils have in-house, I think you can make an argument are better than whatever you can get from outside the organization. I know hockey trade rumors or NHL trade rumors had some article about Hellebuck and the Devils. That wasn't really much of a rumor. I think it was more of like, could that be a fit? And sure, it could. But you'd have to move. But would Winnipeg really want Markstrom? I don't know. And would Markstrom then want to go to Winnipeg? That's the other issue. But I think the Devils' goaltending situation is going to be, but that's a big area. And you do wonder, too, much like the 2024 season, if the Devils had some better goaltending, and Markstrom, who was dealing with injuries, too, which we kind of recently found out. So maybe that's the thing, too. Maybe if he's healthy this offseason, and the same with Allen, going to next year feeling good, it's just the problem takes care of itself, and, we're back to kind of where we were last year. But like the 2024 season, I felt if the Devils had average goaltending, they would have made the playoffs. This year, if they had average goaltending, I don't know if they would have, but I think they would have been very close. They would have been in the mid-90s in points. They would have been right up there. And they got subpar goaltending, and there you go. So goaltending, the Devils, when you lose like this, all 3 areas, you need a lot of work. Forwards, defense, and goaltending. But I think goaltending in the forward group, you can argue, are the 2 areas with the greatest need of improvement. Because the Devils' defense on paper actually doesn't look that bad. They had some injuries last year, but on paper, they should be pretty good. When you have Siegenthaler and Pesce, 2 of the better shutdown defensemen in the league, Luke Hughes and Nemec, 2 very talented young defensemen, and Luke, especially, his skill set is just insane. Dougie Hamilton, an all-star, and your highest paid defenseman, supposed to be who almost set the offensive record for Devils defensemen a few years ago. Brendan Dillon is their veteran tough guy who's just a really solid third pairing guy, and Kovacevic had a rough year. That's another Fitzgerald contract that I'd say is a little, did they have to sign him to $4 million for as long as they did? I don't know. He had a great first year, but was that really that necessary? When you had you have a deep D, the Devils right now, they have 7 pretty solid defensemen, and somebody's going to get moved. I would assume it's Hamilton. You move Hamilton, and then you move Nemec for one of the many Nemec trade rumors that we've seen. Devils are going to need more offense on the back end, which leads to my next point. The offense on this team was terrible, and its depth scoring was the issue. They did not have a 30-goal scorer. Jack Hughes led the team in scoring with 77 points in 61 games. Bratt was second, 71 points, 82 games. Heischer, 66 points, 82 games. Those top 3 there, though you'd like to see maybe one guy in the 80s and whatever, sure. But that is your top 3 in scoring really isn't the problem when you look back on it. Nico Heischer is doing exactly what you'd expect. 60 to 70 points, excellent 200-foot player, wins a ridiculous amount of faceoffs, and can play in any situation very well. Very few of those guys in the league. Jesper Bratt ended up having a really nice second half after he struggled. When Hughes came back, he really took off again. Jack came back from the Olympic break and was on fire. But Timo Meier is your fourth leading scorer with 44 points. He's getting paid to be a 35, 40-goal scorer. That's a problem. Connor Brown next with 43 points. Different type of player. That's actually great. I thought he had a great year and was a great pickup for Tom Fitzgerald. He did everything plus that you would have expected from him. But then Dawson Mercer, 42 points in 82 games. That's your depth scoring. Those are your secondary weapons. Those are the guys that need to step up when you inevitably lose one of your top players for a few games. Injuries happen to everybody, folks, not just the Devils. And those guys didn't step up. I think that's going to be how I'm going to remember a lot of this season as we do a recap of this year. That to me is one of the bullet points, is when they needed their depth scoring to step up to the plate and actually provide offense, they didn't. Timo Meier with only 44 points. He's supposed to be a 35, 40-goal scorer. I'd say 55, 60 points is a decent number for him. But you can argue he's about 10 goals shy of where he should be. And the same with Dawson Mercer. And Mercer and Meier both provide a lot of other things outside of offense. You know, Meier's always been a pretty good defensive player that can handle tough minutes. Mercer the same. Meier played very well in the Olympics for the Swiss, which makes you wonder, is it maybe a utilization issue with the Devils? But Mercer's been a guy that's supposed to have been kind of your next young forward that was going to be a really, really impactful player behind Hischier, Hughes, and Bratt, and he just hasn't been. He has been in some ways, but the offensive numbers just haven't been there, and I think that really hurts. You know, if Meier and Mercer both had 60 points this year, that changes a lot. If you get average goaltending and Meier and Mercer hit the numbers that we'd all be satisfied with, maybe not great seasons, but, you know, Meier has 30 goals, 30 assists. Mercer has 25 goals, 35 assists. A lot changes for this team. And that lack of depth scoring and no one stepping up when Jack was gone was one of the storylines this year. And I think being difficult to play against isn't just physically tough, like we're going to beat the shit out of you tonight. But I think it's being a difficult matchup where you have second and third lines that are producing offense that teams have to look out for. And the Devils back in the day, if they were playing a team with one good line, we'd eat you alive. I mean, forget it, because we'd shut you down and that's it. You have no other weapons. The Devils this year were a team that the Devils of yesteryear would have eaten alive. Shut down Hughes and Bratt. That's it. You don't have anybody else. Shut down Hischier. That's it. You don't have anybody else. You can't win that way. Being tough to play against, again, is not about just physically tough and throwing a ton of hits and fighting and you're gonna leave our barn with bumps and bruises and broken bones. No, it's about being a nightmare for the opposing coach in terms of matchups, where you have multiple weapons in your top 2-3 lines that they have to worry about, where now your bottom six and your bottom pairing can expose the lack of depth on other teams, where now for half the game or more, you have the upper hand in talent or just an ability to produce offense. And those teams that are able to do that are the teams that go far in the playoffs. And, you know, Gritsuk was fine this year. I thought he had a great first year. Works out great. Brown, like I said, was great. I thought Cody Glass, so I'll be honest, I thought maybe the Devils should have moved on from him. I thought he had a great, as a third-line center, he was fine. He's fourth-line center, he's great. A 15-goal fourth-line center that can win a ton of faceoffs. And Cody Glass, to his credit, too, had a little bit more sandpaper to his game than I'd give him credit for. He had a good season. I'd keep Cody Glass around. You know, he was a guy that is maybe like in that Bobby Carpenter mold of was supposed to be an offensive superstar, though Carpenter, you know, was for a period of time, but then he had to really change his game and became this great defensive player. And maybe that's Cody Glass. Is just, yeah, you know what, he was drafted by the Knights to be a number one center, and he's just not. He's a good number 3 and a great number 4. And you know what? Those guys work out on great teams. When that's who's your fourth line center, that's a great place to be in. But the rest of the top six was a zero. Palat gave you pretty much nothing. I wonder how many cardio games he had. That's tough. That's tough. Haminaho was, he's a rookie. It's hard to put a lot on him. But Siplikov gave you virtually nothing. Bukestad gives you virtually nothing. Paul Cotter was disappointing, and he's great in a shootout, and he has good hits numbers, but it just doesn't seem like there's much else that he's providing. Nason had a lot of knee issues. Hopefully that's behind him if he's back next year, but he didn't give you any offense. Glendening wasn't really brought in to be an everyday player, and he didn't really give them much offense. The guys that they brought in from overseas didn't really give you much offense. The depth scoring was the issue. And I'll prove my point. I mean, think of the best Devils teams ever. My opinion, the 2000 Devils. 01 is very close, but they lost in the finals, so they can't be number one. But the Devils had the A-line, Elias, Arnott, Sikora. Your second line was Mogilny with Gomez and Lemieux. Then I'm pretty sure it was, for the most part, Pandolfo with Holik and Breland on the third line, or sometimes with McKay and then Nemchinov, Madden, McKay in the fourth line. That bottom six was very versatile. They were moving guys up and down the lineup, the same with Lemieux. Their defense was just stacked. Stevens, Rafalski, Danico, Niedermeyer, White, Malikov, and of course, Brodeur and net. I'd say even the 2012 Devils, that maybe they weren't as good, but you could roll out four lines. Parisi, Zajac, Kovalchuk, Elias, Zubris, Sikora, Clarkson, Henrique, and Ponikarovsky. Carter, Giante, Bernier was a fantastic fourth line. Devils could really use a fourth line like that. And their defense, they didn't have a superstar or a potential superstar like Jack Hughes or Nemec. It was just six solid defensemen. Now, at the time, we thought Larson could be that. He was kind of Luke Hughes back in the day. Ended up being a great shutdown defenseman and is still playing for Seattle. But Green, Fane, Salvador, Zidlishki, Volchenkov, Larson, Harold. You're just rolling four lines and three D pairs, and you're just a really hard team to play against. And this current version of the Devils are just not. They became a 1.5 line team, and you're not going anywhere that way. And the shame of it is they had the talent to be deeper than that. Palat turning into what he did. Oh, I think I'll probably remember him more so for what he did in 23 against the Rangers in that first round and how crucial he was. But, regular season-wise, it was an abject failure. They never replaced Tyler Toffoli's just sniper ability. And going into next year, you're going to need Gritsuk to take a step forward. But as we all know, there's those sophomore slumps. And though he is an older rookie, he's very inexperienced at the NHL level. Now we have a brawl, by the way, in the Bruins-Buffalo game, which is very entertaining. Man, I really wish the Devils were playing playoff hockey, but all right. And then the Devils in general, they just didn't have any production in their bottom six like I just illustrated. Where you look at the best teams in Devils history, you have that type of production. 95, with the crash line. They were scoring some goals, but they gave you good minutes. They gave you something. They played great defensively. Could take some pressure off the top guys. That'd be great to have another really good defensive centerman that could take a little bit of pressure off of Nico. Maybe you'd see his offensive numbers get a little bit better. And we saw that at the 2000 Devils. Johnny Madden was able to prove that he could handle tough defensive assignments, open some things up for Holik and vice versa. The 2012 team, last team to make the finals, you had different guys that you could use. Zajac and Parisi and Zubris and Elias, and, they were great defensively also, that you could put them against top-line guys and mix and match and create different matchups, and the coach has those options then to make life very difficult for the opposing coach. The Devils this year didn't really have that. So again, it's not just are you physically tough as we're the biggest, heaviest team in the league. It's the matchup game. And in Florida, I think that's where the message gets a little blurred, where it's all about, well, they're heavy teams, so that's why they're tough to play against. Well, last year it was also they're rolling out four lines. when you had Brad Marchand on one night your first line, the next night he's your third line. When you have Reinhart and Bennett with Kachuk and Barkov, I mean, you're rolling out all kinds of different options that other teams are going to have a really hard time handling, especially teams that are top-heavy, like Edmonton. And there are very few teams that can get to the finals that are top-heavy. Edmonton's the exception because McDavid and Draisaitl are probably number 1 and 2 in the league. You know, it's like Mario and Yager back in the day. But it's very difficult to get there being top-heavy. And I love Jack Hughes and I love Nico. They're not McDavid and Draisaitl. They're great. Jack Hughes is the face of American hockey, but they aren't quite there with that. And I think that's the challenge this offseason. And maybe that's where Mehta can really, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name. I will get it right. I've heard Mehta and I've heard Mehta. It's probably Mehta, but I'll go with both for today's show, and hopefully I'll be correct next week. You'll find out. But that's where the analytics and having to be, if you want to call it being cute, fine, or really trying to find those guys that are cost-effective with some cap restraints to round out your roster and have that talent from the top line through the fourth line, from the top pairing through the third pairing. You know, that's how you do that. And maybe that's where he's going to really shine. Where there's already a core here, it's what can you build around them. You know, if the Devils had depth scoring, you can overcome losing Jack Hughes for a month and a half. And if you're going to play in a month and a half, 15 games, you can essentially be, 8-7, 9-6. Not leading the league, but you're keeping your head above water. You're keeping pace. You're in the race. You're not falling behind. You're holding on. And then when Jack comes back, you can take off again. And the Devils, I've seen that as a Devils fan in the past when they've lost Elias, when they've lost Parisi, when that happened and they're okay, we got to keep our head above water here and we're going to be competitive. We're going to be tough to play against. We still have other options. Maybe they aren't all-stars and super talented players, but guys are going to go out there and do their job and do it well. And we're going to win some games 2-1. We're going to win some games 3-2. Or maybe we have some other guys that can step up and play some different roles for a few weeks at a time and give you a little bit of offense. And those are all of the things the Devils lacked this year. And goaltending and forward depth, I think, are the most important things. And now with the depth, I think also you'd have to wonder if they can go out and acquire another top-line winger in some capacity. Does that push other guys down? Like maybe Mercer is better off on your third line. A 40-point guy on your third line is great. Maybe Timo Meier is really better off. He's no longer the 30, 40-goal power forward that's can get hot and really carry you offensively for weeks at a time, 2-3 weeks, which we saw last year in March, and we've seen that before. Maybe he's better served as a mid-six guy at this point in his career. He's an overpaid mid-six guy, frankly, right? Maybe that's where he's at. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope he comes out strong next year, but maybe that is kind of where we're at, or maybe those are two guys that you got to kind of move out into different situations and replace them with the top 9 guys and a top 6 forward. And if I had to pick right now, I'd say the Devils need a top line winger, one more top 6 forward, and 1 or 2 bottom 6 upgrades at least. And defensively, there's a lot of tough decisions there. And I think the paradox I've seen is everyone wants to trade Hamilton and Nemec, but now how do you replace that offense on the back end? Because in my mind, if you trade Dougie Hamilton, you kind of have to keep Nemec around. And if you trade Nemec, you kind of have to keep Dougie around. And I think after last year with Dougie getting scratched and being part of the trade rumor mill for so long, you'd have to wonder if he prefers to leave, but he's not going to get you what you need the way Simon Nemec could. So that's another tough situation. I'd say ideally the Devils could find other ways to acquire top 6 wingers. Maybe you keep Nemec around and he matures next year and starts coming into his own a little bit, and the same with Luke Hughes. But we won't know that until next year. And that's also not the tangible offensive upgrade on the back end that the Devils do need. They didn't provide a lot of offense from the back end this year. And you look on paper, they should have. And I like this group on paper. But you wonder if you swap out Kovacevic for Simone Nemec, you trade Dougie Hamilton, and you go out and try to acquire another top 4 D-men with some above-average offensive capabilities, a 45-point defensiveman. If that's maybe the kind of changes that maybe they need to be a little bit more mobile and get a little bit more offense on the back end. So it is now 9:56. I am almost out of time. I got 3 minutes and 45 seconds to go. Right now, I am watching the Boston-Buffalo game. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, I don't know the outcome yet. So comment below for people listening. Because when this show is done, the Buffalo and Boston game will still be going. But I'm going to finish with a few things maybe off topic. I'm really sick and tired of seeing Carolina win in the playoffs, but that was a hell of a game last night. Carolina and Ottawa, an overturned overtime goal that could have sucked the life out of Carolina, but they went ahead and finished it off anyway, and that also the penalty shot and everything else. That was a wild game last night. Dallas taking some steps back and recovering after losing game 1, which seems to be kind of common for them. That's just how they are in the playoffs. That's just the way things go for Dallas. They just can't win game 1. But they did go ahead and tie that series up. Vegas is up 1-0 over Utah. Edmonton and Anaheim. You got Colorado and LA. Colorado's up 1-0. Carolina up 2-0 over Ottawa. Philly. I do not want to see them move on. If there's 2 teams I do not want to see win, it is the Flyers and the Hurricanes. Please. Rarely in my life have I rooted for Sidney Crosby, but I would love to see the Penguins just have one last run of greatness with this group and beat Philly and really shove it right up their cheesesteak-eating rear ends. Looks like Boston's about to be able to tie the series up at Buffalo, and Montreal and Tampa is going on right now too. Montreal came in tonight 1-0 up on that series. So, if you're going to be listening to YouTube later on, which I'll be putting this episode up, I'm doing this live on Radio Garden State, so I don't know the outcomes of all those games yet, so please comment below. But I would love to see a few teams that are going to go deep here as I have a minute and 45 seconds to go. I got to talk so quickly. I think it'd be great to see Montreal go into the playoffs. I think go far. I think they have a different look than some of these other teams where it's speed and skill, and they are exciting to watch. Maybe it's because the Devils are similar also, and I think you can prove that you can go deep into playoffs by winning that way, especially if you're able to take care of your own end. You can still win with speed and skill. It would be kind of cool to see Crosby have a little bit of a last, great little run here. Though I can't say I've been a Crosby fan. He is one of the greatest players of all time, and it would be cool to just see that. And see him make that work. I would love to see Ottawa come back and beat Carolina. But I'd like to see, I'd like to see Montreal go on a run. I also think it would be absolutely hilarious if the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were viewed as a cup threat for years, are now in shambles. The Devils just grabbed the general manager they wanted. And then their hated rival, the Montreal Canadiens, go through an entire rebuild and come out the other side and are able to go on a run to the Stanley Cup Finals. I also think the history of the game, Montreal making the Stanley Cup Finals, is the same as the Yankees making the World Series. It's the most successful hockey franchise in the history of the game, and I want to see the Devils make it, but I've always kind of liked Montreal a little bit. Devils had a lot of ex-Canadians back in the 90s, and Lemaire and Robinson. So that would be pretty cool to see also. But I am now really running out of time, I would like to thank Radio Garden State, as always, for letting me do my thing on Tuesday nights, 9 to 10. Jersey Devils Brocast. I'm Jay Bake. You can catch us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Have a lovely night, everybody.